I'm back from vacation and we have things to talk about that are going on in OTAs. I'm going to give you the top 3 things to look at as we move through the preseason. Hey, thanks for joining me again. I'm Ryan and I'm going rogue. If you found this channel for the first time, make sure you hit subscribe and the little bell notification so you can find out when I post new videos. Also, really want to make this a conversation in the section so that we can build kind of a community here. I want to know what you guys think. Today we're talking about what's going on in OTAs. Now, I've been out on vacation a little bit, and if you guys want to see some video and I can patch some things together of my time. I was in Hawaii for a while. Just let me know in the comments and I'll work on one of those as well. But today I want to talk about what happened as OTAs began while I was gone, and we're about halfway through the process of the quote-unquote off-season. A couple weeks of OTAs, there's another week of OTAs, and then there's a mini camp. And at that point, you get an idea of where things are at, and it prepares you for what's going to go on come training camp. And they're going to open that up. And this is going to give you an insight. And there's a couple of things that have been going on that are of concern or whatever. And we're going to talk about some of them real quick. A couple of injuries. D Ford is probably going to be out there. It looks like he's taking some reps off. That's one thing to keep an eye on. Not exactly the top 3 because I feel like the staff is really just trying to take care of them. We're going to see what happens. They're going to rotate, and they seem to have Breland Speaks up and running, working with Justin Houston some. A lot of flipping of sides, which is a really nice plus. We're going to talk about that on the podcast this week. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, there'll be a link below. That's the Locked On Chiefs. So for today, what I want to talk about is, first and foremost, there's been kind of a shift, and it's along the offensive line. The offensive line is, like I've said all offseason, one of the key things to this upcoming season. And the change has been kind of a revolving door the last few years in who's going to start at that left guard spot. The other 4 spots are pretty set. You know, obviously Cam Erving is filling in right now and doing a good job from everything that we hear, filling in for Mitch Morse, who's still recovering from his leg injury. And that's great. It clearly seems like Cam Erving's going to be the guy that's the first candidate to take over the Zach Fulton role, which was kind of that swing interior guy, could play guard to center to guard and pretty much cover it. And I think they're going to give Fulton that opportunity to do it. He played well at center in college. I think they're trying to get him these snaps, and that's going to solidify his spot as probably the 6th offensive lineman, particularly along the inside. But what we've seen in the meantime is that last year's starter, the guy who played 13 games in Witzman, is not running with the ones in these OTAs. And I think that's kind of indicative of maybe Parker Ehinger is ready. Maybe he's more fully recovered. And we had a lot of discussion during last season that he was activated but not practicing or not playing. And I think that was just something they gave him more time and they didn't feel he was 100%. At this point, it looks like he's running with the ones. And the interesting thing to note is that through the course of Andy Reid's tenure in Kansas City, they've had a tendency to use the offseason, these offseason OTAs and mini camps in one of 2 ways along the offensive line. One is to experiment completely and try to move guys in and out, find their best spot. They did that for a number of years, and that's been one way to do it, and obviously you have to do that with the Morris injury. But the other thing they've tried to do is they've tried to build chemistry, and there have been years where the all OTAs into camp, the same 5 guys were out there as much as humanly possible in order to build that chemistry. And one guy that's affected by this a lot is Eric Fisher. And I think if they're putting Parker in right now, then Brian may not have the inside edge. What we thought was an open competition this year may have been delayed some, and now it looks like it's possibly a real competition. Now, this is just OTAs, and you can't read too much into it, but Andy Reid and Andy Heck have really made a concerted effort to try and do that with their offensive linemen and build that chemistry. So look for that camp battle to go on. It'll be interesting to see who comes out on top. And when we get to training camp, and there's been no injuries, if Parker Ehinger's out there with the ones, you have to think that he's got the inside edge. Now, moving on, and let me know what you think about Ehinger in particular, but Erving, Reggie McKenzie's back there. Hit the comments. Let me know what you think about the left guard spot. Are you concerned about it? Who's the guy that you think best fits this offense that can help Pat Mahomes stay upright and really try to take this offense to the next level? And we're going to talk about Mahomes here in a minute. But the more interesting battles in my mind are in the secondary. And first and foremost is the safeties. Yes, Eric Berry's back. He's running. It looks like he's moving very well from all reports that I've seen and everyone that I've talked to that's been at the practices. And that's a great sign, but it takes two. You got to have two safeties out there pretty much no matter what. So the real interesting question is, it looks like Dan Sorensen and Eric Murray getting the first shots to be that guy that start and are the tandem with Eric Berry. And that's pretty much what we thought. I think it's probably still a mistake, and I'm not going to go off on a Dan Sorensen tangent today. We can do that some other time or on the podcast. But I think Sorensen's pretty vulnerable back there in a free safety role. He's meant to be in the box. I think that's his best role. And so I see him more as an adjunct, a third safety, rather than a guy that plays at the back of the defense, unless you're looking to do 50-50 with Eric Berry. I think they're still trying to groom Eric Murray, and I hope that he can come through. As a guy who played a lot of nickel corner in college, he's still making that transition. We saw him overmatched with tight ends and played some pretty bad games, but then we saw him do some other things in some zone coverage that I thought really were indicative of what he could become safety-wise. And we'll have to see if he's made that next step forward here in these OTAs, as well as when he gets to training camp. Then you have the young guy in Watts who's going to get a good hard look. I think those guys are probably the inside four that have the inside track to make this roster, but they're not the only guys in the secondary that are battling, and that includes the backup corners. Yes, the top three are set. That's not even an issue, but what goes on beyond Dave Amerson and Kendall Fuller and Steve Nelson? And by the way, it looks like that Amerson and Nelson are going to be your outside guys. Looks like they prefer to try to put Fuller into the inside corner slot. Nickel or dime or whatever you want to call it. It depends on the formation. But if you're going to go base three, it looks like Fuller's going to be the guy on the inside, even though the Chiefs were adamant when they brought him over that he can play on the outside. So I really want to see how it rolls out and what they try to deploy. And it looks like as the defense shifts, and we've been talking about it through the offseason on the podcast, and we're going to talk about it more here, the defense is shifting, and depending on what they run as base, you're going to see more of a trio out there as the base. So I think that's fine. But beyond that, it gets a little interesting. And young guys like Termon Smith and Aaron Springs are putting in some work. You got Ashton Lampkin back there. You still have guys that Will Redmond even, that have some ability that the Chiefs are still trying to figure out if they can get done what they need to get done with those guys. I won't put it past them to make another acquisition, whether that's on cutdown day or still somebody else that they feel can play, but it's something else to keep an eye on, and that's the number two. The number one thing to keep your eye on as we go through this is the team is trying to keep things quiet right now. They're trying to keep it nice and mellow and put no pressure that the outside world is trying to put pressure. And that's Patrick Mahomes. They have battened down the hatches in terms of practice. Even the media are only getting one practice to watch per session in these OTAs. And that's a departure. I think that's so that they can't see what he's doing. You know, we got some information from other sources. Matt Miller put out a quote from somebody inside the organization that talked about last season, even in practice with Pat Mahomes torching Marcus Peters. That's a piece of evidence that's going to make the hype that much more. So I think that's something they're trying to keep a lid on. And even a guy that's very stoic most of the time. Some even call him stern, but Louis Riddick on ESPN, a guy who's worked with Andy Reid in the past, has been nearly schoolgirl giddy about Pat Mahomes so far this preseason. I think those outside influence gives you an idea of what not only the outside world thinks, but probably what the conclusions would be drawn from both media and fans if we were allowed to see that. So I expect them to keep the lid on as much as they can. But if you get to the end of minicamp, and the thing to watch is Andy Reid, and when you hear Andy Reid speak about Pat Mahomes, because everybody in the world is going to ask him questions, and his reaction to that is something that's going to be very important to watch. He's got a couple of press opportunities that are going to be at the end of the last OTA session as well as the minicamp. So keep an eye on that. And if you start to hear things about how they feel they can expand the offense and anything, you know, that goes on and is a little more descriptive, that gets him a little bit hyped, I think that's a really good sign. Even though we're not going to get the visual out of it, I think you can take that and watch Andy Reid and see what that leads to in terms of what Pat Mahomes is getting ready to do. I'm trying to hold the hype train back, but it's getting pretty difficult. And I'm excited for him too. I think he's a young kid that's taken the position very well, and I think he's leading by his example this offseason, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of him. When training camp opens up, I think it's going to be full pedal on the gas, so we will see what happens with that. But I want to know what you think. What are you watching? Do these 3 things still come across as the top 3 things for you? Because that's what's important. Hit me in the comments and have a good conversation with everybody else. It's been great lately. You guys have been commenting a ton, and that's great to see. If you want to support the show, there's links down here for the Amazon links. That helps a little bit. Anything else, spread the word. Tell your friends. Let's grow this group and grow these subscribers. Hit the subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications, and leave your comments. Check out the Locked On Chiefs, and I'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you then.